Hi everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with a new PB&J card class. And today I am going to be making 3 cards with you, each featuring a very simple no-line watercolor technique. And I have to say that these cards were completely inspired by the very talented Heather Telford, and I will leave a link down below to her cards that inspired me. So to begin, or before we begin, I just want to mention that I will have a full supply list on screen at the very end of the video. So if you want to check out anything in more detail, like the stamps, the inks, the colors, any of that, you can just hit pause at that time and check it out. Now for our first set of cards, the first 2 cards, we're going to use this new transparent set from Penny Black. This is called Thriving, and I love this transparent set because with this you get 4 very good sized bold floral images, and they are all very great for this technique. So I'm stamping using a stamp positioning tool onto Bristol smooth cardstock, and I'm coloring onto my stamp using Arteza Twi markers. Now you could do this with any of your favorite water-based markers, but they all are going to have a little bit different brightness, boldness, and stampability, so just play around with this. I'm going then now to blend what I've just stamped using a fine tip paintbrush and wherever I let that paintbrush touch the area that I stamped, that ink that I stamped with, because it is a water soluble ink, is going to start to bleed and blend, and that's how you get this no line watercolor look. It really gives you a hand painted look, and it's quite easy to do. My biggest piece of advice that I would recommend when doing this is to definitely try it on, if you're having trouble getting your colors to blend and move, is to try it on that smooth Bristol paper. For me, that made all the difference. I've tried this technique in the past and not been as happy with the results as I was this time using that smooth Bristol paper. Now I am keeping my image, my paper, within my Misty Stamp Positioning tool, and I'm just working one color at a time. And I also feel like that gives me time to get in there and blend what I have stamped before it really starts to dry and requires more water and more brush work. These markers have a pretty fine nib, so I just kind of turn it off to the side and color on my stamp. Another tip that I'd recommend is to use a variety of colors. So you can see here I used a light blue to first color over all of those flowers and the petals, and now I'm just going in here and there with a darker blue right on top. Now because I'm putting a darker blue on top, I didn't find any contamination to my markers, but if you had any ink transferring, just color on a scratch paper until your marker color is clear. I wanted to add in a few more darker places after I stamp, so I'm just going to add those in. And I forgot those leaves there, so I snuck those in there with some green and blended those out. And I actually think this looks quite beautiful like this, but I wanted to give it a little more blending. So you can see here, I start with a wet paintbrush. What I do is I dip it in my water and then I pat it a little bit dry on a dry paper towel. And then when I first put that paintbrush down onto the paper, I usually start in a white area, and then I just very carefully work my way right up to the tip of where the petal ends, where it was stamped with the ink. So some of the water is already in the petal, and that allows that ink to move and flow. Now because we're keeping this in the stamp positioning tool, if you should come to your paper, say, and bring way too much water or you blend too much, you can always go back and just re-stamp it to add more detail. I wanted to add a few splatters, so I just colored there onto my stamping platform, picked it up with my paintbrush and splattered it onto the paper, dabbed it up with a paper towel, and then I'm going to add a little bit darker color too. And I kept this card very clean and simple. You can see to finish this off, all I'm going to do is add a sentiment from our Better with Age transparent stamp set. And I'm also going to paint and add a butterfly from our butterfly string die cut. And this is a simple card, but it's so beautiful because that just light, fresh watercoloring shows. I think these would be great to make to give as a set or just to have a nice stash of birthday cards ready to go. You always never, you never, at least I never have them ready when I need them. So you could make these ahead of time. Now I want to show you another card. This is another stamp from that same stamp set, Thriving. And this time I'm going to color onto the flower petals first. And I used a lighter color. And then I'm going to go in with kind of a richer red. So one is more of a rose red. Next one is more of an orange red. Again, the exact colors will be listed up on screen at the end of the video. And I'm going to stamp that. Now look what a difference adding just a little bit of water here will do to this image. Now I am not looking to keep all of the detail that I just stamped. So that's what I love about this, is that some of those petals are going to remain and some are going to completely blend out and give a nice loose watercolor look. I think this gives it a very sort of hand-drawn or hand-painted effect. I'm being careful not to get too many big puddles as I work my way around, or too much water where the two flowers meet. You can see there where those were. I was very careful and even didn't go right up to the edge so that they didn't blend and bleed into each other and create a blob. And by adding two colors of ink onto the stamp before I stamped it, you get some more variation when you blend it out with water. Now I will go back to the stamp and add the greens here onto the leaves. These leaves were so fun to do because they're so big and open. And on this particular image, I love the combination of the flowers that are more tight and more intense with color and the leaves that have more open area. I also added a touch of color here down to the flower pot. And sorry about that, I'm a little off camera. I'm going to stamp that down. And then begin blending that. So I'm starting again by putting that paintbrush that has a little bit of water on it, typically starting into a white open area and just carefully working my way up to the edge. I'm working around the image, trying not to work on two petals that are two leaves that are right next to each other until the painting has a little bit of time to dry. You do want to be careful with the reds. Sometimes they will bleed. So if you know you're going to do a red, like when I did this, I probably should have started by doing the leaves. Then I don't have to worry about that running into the leaf color, but it's no big deal. When you're going for a loose kind of watercolor look like this, you don't have to worry about things being perfect, because sort of that artist painterly look is what you want. And so mistakes, like Bob Ross used to say, are only happy accidents. Now I did want a little bit more color down here on the pot than just that one little outline was going to provide. So I colored directly with my marker along the edges, and I'm going to work on blending that out with my paintbrush. Kind of going in there with a drier brush to scoop up where that green bled a little bit down into the pot. And now here I'm going to just take some green and color onto my acrylic. Basically it's like an acrylic block, the part of my stamping platform. You could also use a palette or some packaging, any non-porous surface. And I'm going to pick that up with my paintbrush and just add a little bit of it here and there just to give some more interest to these leaves, to let those colors mix and blend, sort of adding them into some shadow areas where one leaf is behind another. You don't have to do this step, but it's just sort of like one more thing you can do if you're enjoying the technique and you want to just sort of bump up the depth and the color variation just a little bit. So we're just continuing there to blend things. And these markers also have a very fine tip on the other end, and you can go in and I just put a tiny little touch of that in a few shadow areas, and it's amazing what just a little bit of that will do as far as making those leaves sort of sink down in and give them more dimension. And then I very slightly went back and blended that a little bit. Very subtle, but it does make a difference. I love how some of the veining still remains that we initially stamped, but how light it is. I'm coloring with some yellow. I just wanted to brighten up that pot a little bit. I was initially going for sort of a terracotta look, but then I decided that I wanted something a little bit sunnier for the card. And again, picking up some of that green, watering it down and painting just a little bit here. There I got way too much, so I'm going to blend that out a little bit and just adding that to ground the image. This is such a happy springtime and even a summertime image. You can use it for any card, birthday, thinking of you, thank you. I love images like that that you can just keep using again and again. And then now I'm just going to take some enamel accents and add it to the center of these flowers. So with a very simple card like this, it's fun just to add one little thing to it that I think takes it just to the next level, gives it some type of dimension to it without a lot of bulk. And so there's a look at those once they dried. My sentiment comes from our 30-826 teacher sentiments, but the sentiment that I've chosen really could be used for a lot of different occasions and different people because it just says thank you for making a difference. This would be great to accompany even a gift of a plant this time of year. Now for our final card, I am using our Cling Stamp 40-775 Delight, and this is a delight to do this technique with. This is so fun with this stamp. You have lots of choices of different flowers and different colors. And the card I'm working on is a standard A2 size card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And you'll see that this one stamp will take care of your whole card. So I'm going to follow just that same technique, coloring onto the flowers with my particular markers that I've chosen. Sort of working piece by piece on the image, mixing, trying to mix more than one color just to give some variation when I go in and blend it because 2 ink colors will be down there on the paper. What's nice about this technique too is you can really pick and choose what parts of an image you want to use. So I'm using pretty much everything on this particular stamp, except I decided to leave off the butterflies on this, mainly because I liked the way that it looked and the way that it fit on the card without the butterflies. And so you can pick and choose which flowers that you want to use, if you want the butterflies in, if you don't, and you can use lots of different colors for these flowers. Now here I did do, because this is a larger stamp, I did stamp or did color and stamp pretty much everything and then go in and do my blending, just to save time. And it really didn't take very long to do the coloring and the stamping because even though there's a lot to the stamp, nothing is very big itself to color in, if that makes any sense. If I get any ink on a place where I don't want it, I just take my finger and just dab it off. Like if I get this green on a flower or a petal, then I just take my finger and take it off. You could also use a baby wipe or paper towel if you didn't want to get your finger messy. But it is easy to get right in there with your finger. Always give it a couple of extra looks because I always manage to miss something when I stamp these. I did choose to have the bottom portion of the image to go off the edge of the card, so you're just sort of seeing this wild flower garden. I love the movement that this illustration on this stamp has with those flowers. So now here I'm just going in with my paintbrush and blending. Some of the flowers you're going to see more of the stamping sort of disappear, like on this one. That's where I've used more water, some a little bit less, and that variety is what gives it that hand painted look. And on this stamp I'm also going to show you sort of another way, or on this card I mean, that you can go in and add even more depth and blending. So if you stay tuned, as I finish on this one, I'll add another little technique you can combine with this that, like I said, adds more depth and blending. It also helps hide any places where maybe you got a little bit too much water and things got a little bit blobby. So I will show you that here in just a bit after I go in and blend these out for you. Now this stamp is fun for this technique. I also think this stamp would be great in Boston white and just doing ink blending on top like a monochromatic card, or in Boston white and then painted inside and having that beautiful white edge of all of the embossing show. There's so many different techniques you can do with this stamp called Delight. So I'll just continue working my way around, kind of starting in the wide open area and then knowing as soon as I touch that ink it's going to start to bleed and blend into the wet areas. You can see I'm leaving some white there so that these petals have a little more definition, or these flowers have a little more definition. And the Bristol paper is pretty forgiving too. If you have like there where I had it bleed beyond the edge, if you dab it up right away, you can usually save yourself from any boo-boos that you might have. Now here I've just taken some Ranger Distress Ink re-inkers used as watercolors, and I love these just because they're very bold and vibrant, and I'm just going to add a little touch of them into some shadow areas on the card. And you can immediately see how this one little thing really makes these flowers look more dimensional. Now these are wet, so they will sort of blend out some of the stamping that you've done, but they also blend right into it. So I don't want to put it all over the flowers, but you can see like on these, I'm just focusing on those petals that are behind another petal and putting that in the shadow area. And then that petal that's in the front really moves forward basically. And then you have a more dimensional looking flower. You also get some variation in color, which adds interest to the card, especially on a fairly simple card like this where there aren't a lot of layers or die cutting involved. Just continue to work my way around the flowers. I know this video is a little bit longer. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to take you along for all of the different parts so that there wasn't anything left out that you needed to see or might have wanted to see. Now on these flowers I felt like they definitely needed some more color, some more richness, and that was more important than the definition of the stamping. So I'm just adding a darker color here around the center of the flower and blending that out. And I just love the loose sort of look of this, the very artsy feel that this gives. You can even go directly to your paper with your marker and it will blend with what is already there and add a hint of another color. And then I wanted to take away a little bit of the brightish pink of these, so I added a little bit of yellow in there just to warm up that reddish pink color. Now for these, I wanted to add a little more dimension and again, sort of some more layers to the petals. So you can see I put a layer near the bottom, and then if I put some darker color towards the center, all of a sudden now it looks like there are layers upon layers to that flower. And I put another area there and now it just looks much more round. And I will even add a little bit here to the leaves, and this is mostly just to add variation of color, not so much adding a lot more dimension, but just more than one green color. And because I like to fiddle. I know when I paint sometimes I just keep going and going, and that's because I'm enjoying it and having fun. So when you're doing this yourself, just keep going while you're having fun, and when it stops being fun, stop. Your card is done. I took a little bit of this gray marker here to add some shadow on these flowers just to give that center more dimension and look more finished. Also hides any areas where that bled that I didn't want it to bleed in towards the center of the flowers. And then to finish off this card, I have stamped the sentiment from our 30-813 Ever Thanks transparent set just up in the upper right hand corner and mounted it onto my note card. I also added a little detail on the upper left hand corner, and I apologize, this photo it's really difficult to see, but I'll show you another picture where you can see it better. But onto white cardstock using a gray ink, I just stamped our elaborate background stamp, and I'm just using a tiny little piece of that. I tore the corner of that panel that I painted and added that little bit of background stamping behind it, just for that extra something to give the simple card a little bit more. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, YouTube, Twitter, as well as Instagram, our website, and our blog. And I will link all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And as promised, here are all the supplies used in creating these cards. Thanks for watching.